Well, in the end, it was a pretty familiar-looking top six in Abu Dhabi at the end of qualifying, with Lando Norris and Esteban Ocon just adding a bit of spice for McLaren and Alpine in 7th and 8th. But the two Red Bulls on the front row, the two Ferraris behind them, and then the two Mercedes. Got to say, George and Lewis looked really good in FP3, but they kind of fell away a little bit in qualifying, whereas Ferrari and Red Bull both picked up a little bit of top speed, but certainly some grip. Mercedes kind of stayed where they were. They looked very good in FP3, but their top speeds went nowhere, and they were trying to help one another with tows. But at the end of the day, it's a circuit at sea level. There is the usual drag penalty for Mercedes, and that showed in qualifying. They still have a very good race car in terms of grip in sectors 1 and 3, but after qualifying, it was really sector 2 that showed up the difference still between the Mercedes and the Red Bull and the Ferrari. Ferrari looking really good. We'll get onto them in a minute, but before we do that, let's just have a look at the sector times so we know exactly where we're at and what happened in qualifying. And there you can see pretty much of a muchness between the front runners in sector 1. It's a lovely piece of road, this, particularly turn 1 heavy braking, but turns 2, 3 and 4 very, very high speed. Not easy in these cars, as Charles Leclerc found this morning when he had a big moment when he bottomed out quite early on before they got the setup right, and just massive opposite lock mid-corner. I don't know what speed he was doing, probably in 6th gear at the time. So a very demanding sector, but they're all pretty good through there. It says a lot about the current Grand Prix car, I think. Sector 2 is defined inevitably by the length of that straight, and you can see in qualifying that Max Verstappen 36.0, and then just go down to Lewis Hamilton 36.4, George Russell 36.4, 4 tenths. Almost half a second is a lot to be losing in one sector. At one moment, Lewis had done a very good lap in Q2 and said, wow, you know, they said P2, good job, Lewis. You're only 3 tenths away from Checo. And he went, 3 tenths. And of course, it was all in sector 2. And in sector 3, again, you can see it's pretty close there. Here, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, very, very even in terms of sector 3 and sectors 1 for that matter. Really good lap by Charles Leclerc, but again, losing out. So before we get on to Friday, let's talk about Red Bull. Really good performance, really good recovery. There was a bit of a drama. We thought maybe some politics coming into it again when at the beginning of Q3, when Checo wondered where Max had got to, but his car had basically just stopped and they had to reboot the whole thing. Obviously, everybody looking for a tow. And in terms of tows and top speeds, let's just have a look at what they actually did in qualifying. Where you see a forward slash, it kind of refers to when they did get a tow. So you can see there that Checo in a tow from Max 331, without a tow 328, still quickest of the cars through the speed trap all day. Max Verstappen 328, 329 seemed to be pretty much on his own when he was doing those laps from what we could see. Fernando Alonso didn't make it through into Q3 in the Alpine 326, still a really quick car through the air there, and you can see Esteban Ocon 324 as well. Low drag you could say, but they could do with a bit more downforce, I'm sure the drivers would say. And then Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc both locked into that sort of 324, 325 bracket, which is not bad considering that they are relatively near Red Bull. Red Bull probably running relatively more downforce than Ferrari. Ferrari probably a little bit more on edge, and probably therefore tomorrow will have more difficulty keeping their tyres in shape, looking after the tyre dig in other words. At one point Charles Leclerc was heard to say, tyres are going off after 4 corners, which kind of tells its own story. Lando Norris came into the frame really well for McLaren with some good top speeds as well. Look at that 322, 321 compared with poor old Daniel Ricciardo, who did a good job nonetheless to get into to Q3, 317, 318 without a tow. George Russell 322 in a tow from Lewis, but Lewis really slow on his own, 317, did one lap at 321, but that wasn't in Q3. And Sebastian Vettel, who did very well, like Daniel, to get into Q3 in what could, well, it's certainly his last Grand Prix, probably Daniel's as well, 313, 319 in the Aston Martin. Well, let's just talk a little bit about Ferrari, because they were incredibly impressive this morning, I thought, focusing, unlike Ferrari normally, focusing on long runs. And there you can see the only team that did a proper long run with both cars this morning on the medium tyre. Not much fuel in the car, obviously, for the first 3 or 4 laps. And you can see again locked into that 321, 322 top speed, which was to show through in qualifying. But then they put fuel in the car and did their homework. They've got 8 laps out of the 2 cars, so that's more than any other team has got. It may not have been particularly good news for Ferrari, but at least they've done that homework. And I think it showed that they did quite a lot of work on the car overnight to get a bit more top speed out of the car without losing too much grip. And both Carlos and Charles looking really sharp, I thought, in terms of the two drivers just working well with one another and doing a good job on track. This is about the best they've looked all year. And another screamer of a lap from Charles Leclerc, of course, in qualifying. Really, really good. He made his fair share of errors, as he does, but when it really came down to it in the last 2 or 3 tenths of Q3, he was right on it, and really, really good lap. So yeah, a very good day. I would say probably the most significant thing about today was not so much that Red Bull are back where they should be, but more that Ferrari have done a really good recovery job, I think, and they've got a pretty good race car for tomorrow, albeit a car that probably will be pretty tough on its tyres. So that needs to be borne in mind, and that will be what Mercedes will be going into the race hoping to benefit from. A lot of what we saw in qualifying in terms of top speed and results showed through when they did the soft tyre laps in Q3 this morning. You can see there Sergio Perez was actually quickest, 3:29, and Max didn't really get in a great lap. He didn't feel great about the car in FP3, and certainly in Q2 he felt the back end was not particularly good, but typical for Red Bull, they got it absolutely right in Q3. And there were also quite a lot of brake issues today as well. Lewis Hamilton complaining about the brakes for most of qualifying, Max Verstappen talking about brakes, and quite a lot of drivers, particularly the McLarens and Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin, getting some smoke and overheating out of the left front brake going to Abu Dhabi. We've had quite a lot of brake trouble in Formula One this year in 2022, partly because of the new regulations, the 18-inch wheels and the way they're doing the cooling now, and that's going to be something, of course, that all the teams will be looking at over the winter to try to get around that. It's a long time since we've had chronic brake problems in Formula One, but they are materialising, and of course we had a lot of brake knockoff, call that glazing, with drivers like Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon as well in the season so far this year. And just continuing this analysis here from the FP3 top speeds, they reflect the fastest laps in FP3, and you can see going into qualifying, Mercedes every reason to be pretty optimistic. 25.2, 25.3 for Lewis and George, and they improved at about the rate that you would expect. But the problem was that Red Bull improved a lot more going into qualifying, and obviously that was to do with power, it was to do with just really getting the best out of the car, and that was the big difference. Lando Norris looked very good in FP3 as well, 3:20. I mean, that's a good top speed for McLaren to be ending the year with, very promising. And Charles Leclerc, like Carlos Sainz, not really going for a quick lap in FP3, but doing that good job with the long runs, 3:21 and 25.5. You know, he would have been thinking, well, you know, we got to get ahead of the Mercs. And I put Alex Albon in there because he was the quickest. I think we saw with 3:31 from Perez in qualifying with a tow, but Alex Albon 3:33. I don't think with a tow in the Williams. Bottom line, massive top speed, not enough downforce at Williams, and that's something they'll be hoping to trade off over the winter. Top speed for downforce, that is. So that was it. Other results. Good for Mick Schumacher to get through into Q2 in his last race with Haas. He's going to be replaced next year by Nico Hülkenberg. That's bad news, of course, for Mick. Good news for Formula One and good news for Nico Hülkenberg, and a good choice if you're looking for two drivers that are going to bring the car home and get points when the car's capable of being brought home with points. Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, not a bad driver pairing. I do think, though, that reflects a little bit on where we're at in Formula One today. We've got all this emphasis on young driver tests and so forth, but we also have the massively cramping of the style by the budget cap, and if you're at the back of the grid team, every dollar counts, and Haas will be thinking, I just can't afford to have any more damage to the cars. I've got to have two experienced guys that not hit the wall and can bring the cars home, as I say. And that kind of puts a damper, really, on the next generation having its opportunity. So you could say on the one hand, yeah, great for old Hulk to be getting a chance. On the other side of the coin, a young guy isn't getting a chance there, and that's a function, I think, of the times, a little bit of the budget cap in 2022. But you can't criticise Haas for that. That's just the well, you can a little bit because they're one of the teams behind the whole budget cap thing. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and good to have Nico Hülkenberg back in Formula One replacing Mick Schumacher. Kevin Magnussen didn't make it out of Q1, unlike his teammate. And in Q2, Fernando Alonso didn't make it through into Q3. There was a moment when you thought, politics again, when he came across Esteban Ocon mid-corner going through the long left-hander, slightly banked left-hander. And it was just one, I actually said, well, thank you, mate. actually there was a pause between thank you and mate. And I think that said it all. He did another lap, but presumably then the tyres had gone off. And when they got on the radio to say to him, you didn't make it through, Fernando, he said, yep, okay, thank you. Like, wait for the storm cloud that's going to appear when he gets out of the car. So that was a bit disappointing for Alpine, of course, in this time when it's still a bit of a fight going on there. And you've got Daniel Ricciardo in the top 10 as well for McLaren. Only other incident of note, I think, really was in FP3 this morning when the red flag came out after Pierre Gasly got a punctured right front going over the curb. It looks like there was some damage before, but quite a lot of debris came off the car as he went over this curb at high speed, and then the tyre just went flat. And as a result of all the debris and stuff, they put out the red. And the next thing we knew was that Lando Norris was on the radio saying Lewis Hamilton, and I think he said Kevin Magnussen, somebody else. Let's forget about the other driver because it wasn't in the game. But Lewis Hamilton has just passed me under the red. And that obviously went to the stewards. And when they looked at all the data, it was very clear that Lewis, the millisecond he saw the red, he came out of the throttle and hit the brakes and did everything correctly. But in doing so, he passed Lando Norris, who was going much, much slower than Lewis at the time. Okay, that was the result. But my point is that it's a little bit like tittle-tat, is it not, at school? Because this is FP3. We're not talking about race positions here. And Lando's going slowly. He's in actually no position at all to judge the pace and the closing gap between Lewis's line of vision, the red flag, and when he's coming out of the throttle and the brakes. Yes, of course he got past. But what was that all about? That was about, maybe I can get a grid improvement here and get a penalty for Lewis. And I think, again, that comes under the heading of, I don't know, things aren't as they used to be, because you just cannot imagine in an untimed practice session, even 10 years ago, a driver doing that. That, I suppose, is a reflection of where we're at with penalties and how much a part of Formula One penalties have become. It's probably the teams all have penalty divisions where they're constantly looking at all the other teams now, not from a technical point of view, from a sporting point of view, to see if they can get any sort of advantage through getting a penalty for one of their competitors. And that's kind of sad, I think. I suppose there's no other word to describe it as sad. Sick, maybe? No, probably sad. And, you know, Lando's a good bloke. He's a racing driver. And for him now to be, I saw Lewis pass me under the red and in on-time practice when it didn't really matter and I couldn't really judge how fast he was going because I was going really slowly, that would have been the true thing. You know, it's a bit odd that he was doing that, I think. Anyway, that's just another sign of the Formula One times, I guess, in 2022. And I hope that doesn't continue because, you know, Lewis did everything absolutely correctly, as he would. Well, he hasn't always done it perfectly, has he? But yeah, more or less, you know, you would expect him to. So we go into Abu Dhabi, the final race of the 2022 Formula One season. Well, you know, what can you say? It's the signature front row, Red Bull, then it's Ferrari. It was kind of where we started the year, and then the two Mercs. But we've had our moments, and the two Ferraris have done a very good job to get to where they are now from where they were a few races ago. And we got a bit of a battle between McLaren and Alpine. And we got a P2 in the Constructors' World Championship to define. So Ferrari doing a good job in that sense. But at the moment, looks like Sergio Perez is in good shape. The only other thing, of course, ultimately, is going to be the fallout from Brazil. And at the moment, we're seeing a Red Bull totally united, completely normal, although I just feel there's a bit of a tone in Max's voice in everything. This isn't right, that's not right. It's not as conversational, as chatty as it used to be. But maybe we're not hearing all the radio, so that's probably not fair judgment. And then afterwards, there was sort of the cursory embraces and arms and handshakes between Checo and Max. And as I said at the end of the last video, and as I said on live streams, I can't imagine there's any way in the world that Perez isn't going to be doing anything other than behaving as normal, hoping he'll get all the help he can possibly get from Max tomorrow. Not that he needs that much, but if he needs the help, he'll want to have it from Max. So he's absolutely for sure being the guy that Max wants him to be, that Red Bull would like him to be. But deep down inside, I cannot imagine in a million years that he's forgotten Brazil that quickly and that will be just written off the slate. I don't think it will be, and it may well come back to play in 2023. We'll have to see, of course, next year. But for the moment, I think things relatively calm. But I wouldn't want to see too many things go wrong for Max tomorrow because he looks like he's on the edge of eruption at any given moment. That's just the feeling you get when you see his body language and the way he's in the car at the moment, and when things aren't going quite right. Checo seems very laid back, very, very relaxed, and that's good to see. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. It'll be, Sector 2 defined qualifying, and probably it'll define the race tomorrow, the speeds on the straight. But ultimately, a lot will come into play, particularly the Ferrari tyre management situation, and that's something that Mercedes obviously be looking at very closely, and then there's the McLaren Alpine things. That'll be fun as well. So there we are. Thanks for watching. Look forward to tomorrow. See you then.